Hi there, I'm Joel and welcome to my channel. If you're new to my channel, well, I basically put out Scooby-Doo reviews every Saturday. So basically, yeah, I take a Scooby-Doo episode and I review it. And if you're a follower of me and you've seen my episodes before, don't worry, those reviews will continue to come out. Those reviews are still the priority. This sort of video is bonus content. Think of it as that. It's just basically content that I want to look at a little deeper, something I was passionate about or just wanted to share. It's also stuff that might help my channel grow a little bit too, because I'm bringing in additional information other than Scooby-Doo, and it might just inspire someone to check out Scooby-Doo. So this sort of thing too, it also won't be that regular. Again, my focus is on the reviews. This sort of thing sometimes takes a long time to do, 10 to 20 hours. And as such, it will probably come out once a month, every 6 weeks. We'll see how it goes. And today we are covering the Gothic Horror of Scooby-Doo. There's going to be several parts to this series of this Gothic horror thing that I want to do. And that's because there's just a lot of information to cover. So I kind of wanted to make it bite-sized in a way that, you just walk away learning a little something each and every time. And overall, though, I have three things that I want to do. First, I just want to introduce what Gothic horror is, and I'm going to do this casually. If you're really hardcore into Gothic horror, you probably won't like this video. It's more catered towards Scooby-Doo fans, and I'm going to make some blanket statements that might frustrate you because I'm not going to go in depth about a specific book or film that is in regard to Gothic horror. It's just a broad statement, kind of blanket kind of deal going on here. And secondly, what I want to do with this series of Gothic horror was just introduce the common pillars or elements of Gothic horror. Things like damsel in distress and the Labyrinth and the stormy weather and all sorts of cool stuff that I'm going to talk about a little further on in this video, but I'll expand upon in future videos. And then finally, and this is the most important one, I want to argue that the very best Scooby-Doo episodes incorporate Gothic horror. With all that said, I don't consider Scooby-Doo Gothic horror. I think it borrows from the genre, of course, but when I think of Scooby-Doo, I just think of it as Scooby-Doo. However, my most favorite Scooby-Doo episodes contain a ton of Gothic horror elements, and that's what I want to discuss or show with this series. I want to explain what these elements are and where they pop up in Scooby-Doo and why these elements are so cool and what they kind of mean. And today we're covering my most favorite one, which is the Labyrinth. And I'll leave a timestamp below. If you watch anything, watch that part. That part's really cool. Otherwise, I'm just going to introduce what Gothic horror is briefly. So enough of my pre-ramble. Let's cut to the intro. So what the heck is Gothic horror? Well, Gothic horror is a genre of literature that became very popular in Europe during the 1800s. Of course, it was developed before then, but the most famous books came out probably in the 1800s, and those would include Dracula, Frankenstein, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Phantom of the Opera. There are many other books, and I won't mention them here as you probably haven't heard of them, and well, if you're really that interested, just Google a reading list for Gothic horror, and you can go down that rabbit hole on your own. These books were so popular that they were later translated into popular films, such as the classical Universal Monster series, such as Dracula, Frankenstein, and The Invisible Man.
Aren't you drinking? I never drink. Why?
When I mention Dracula or Frankenstein, your mind probably goes to great big castles filled with cobwebs and secret passages, dark and stormy nights, damsels in distress, mad scientists, cemeteries at dusk, grave robbers, and a battle between humanity and perhaps the supernatural. And all of these elements are Gothic horror. There's also an aesthetic to Gothic horror. At least in my mind there is. First, there is the architecture, castles, gated mansions, manors with steep slate roofs, buildings with gargoyles, cemeteries featuring statuesque like tombstones, such as crosses and angels, all spring to mind. You'll see this architecture type in Batman's Gotham City, where the word Gotham is basically a take on the word Gothic. And similarly, Gothic fashion can be seen in Batman with clothing such as capes, cloaks, top hats, canes, and dark suits. With Gothic fashion, women sport dark makeup, wear corsets, dark lace, gloves, and silver jewelry. Everyone is dressed to the nines in a manner where they look mysterious and elegant. Side note, I do not consider Batman necessarily Gothic, but much like Scooby-Doo, the popular franchise certainly borrows heavily from the genre. Gothic horror is, of course, still popular today, just not as prominent as it was during the height of the Universal Monster era or the 1800s when these books were popular. Directors like Guillermo del Toro keep it alive with films such as Crimson Peak and The Shape of Water. Meanwhile, the popular Netflix miniseries based on Shirley Jackson's books like The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor have been sending us to bed with nightmares.
It's alive!
So now that I've basically explained what Gothic horror is in the most basic terms, let's get on to the first pillar of Gothic horror, which is my favorite, the Labyrinth. The first pillar of Gothic horror that I'm going to discuss is the Labyrinth, which refers to any large building or property. So in Scooby-Doo, we see it as the castles they are going through, or maybe a dusty mansion. In many instances, these castles, mansions, and other properties are run down or abandoned. The bones of them are in good shape, but they are full of cobwebs, furniture with stark white sheets covering them, and forgotten relics such as paintings, swords, and suits of armor. On the surface, the Labyrinth might seem scary as it has torture chambers, empty cells full of bones, secret passages, and windowless rooms that are ready to trap you for eternity. Also, these homes might be full of ghosts, secrets, and unsolved mysteries. When we think of the word labyrinth, we often think of a maze. And at midnight, and it's incredibly dark out, it's easy to understand how you can enter a haunted house and get lost, never to come back out. We saw this with Uncle Shagworthy in Scared-A-Lot and Camelot, where he got locked in a room of his own castle. And in What the Hex is Going On, Sharon Weatherby is also locked in a room, and the gang in that episode are trapped inside a crypt at one point. And of course, danger-prone Daphne is always getting separated, such as her falling through a trapdoor in Hassel in a Castle. The Labyrinth doesn't necessarily need to be a castle or a mansion. I'd argue that the mine in Mind Your Own Business is a labyrinth, as I certainly fear getting lost in caves. Or the sprawling airplane graveyard in the spooky Space Coot can be identified as a labyrinth. The labyrinth might be just a simple house like Norman Bates' home in Psycho. It's instantly recognizable, and while the film is not necessarily a Gothic horror film, the house is full of creepy taxidermy birds that always seem to be looking at you. Furthermore, it has secret passages where Norman Bates can spy on his guests showering, and I can't forget to mention Mother, who is locked away in the basement. A film that portrays the labyrinth quite well and will really drive home my point is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Labyrinth means maze, and we see Danny Torrance endlessly driving his big wheel through the empty hallways of the Overlook Hotel. Watching it, we shouldn't be scared. Yet even before he encounters the twins or the woman in room 237, we are unsettled as we watch Danny Torrance exploring the Overlook Hotel. Why is this scene so unsettling to many though? This is where I want you to pay attention. The labyrinth is scary because it represents our mind. In Gothic literature, the labyrinth often symbolized the entrapments of European society at the time, which was based basically on a class system. If you were born into poverty, you'd forever be poor. If you were a woman, forget about having a career. So authors vented their frustrations by creating stories with monsters, ghosts, and evil step-parents that represented authority at the time that were holding them back. And by tucking it away under the guise of literature, they could write freely without fear of being imprisoned by the government or authorities. And this is why Gothic horror became popular, because many people could identify with the author's frustrations of being trapped within their position in society. In the modern era, the labyrinth extends well past this concept of being held back by society, and it dives more into our subconscious fears. In The Shining, for example, the labyrinth of the Overlook Hotel can be interpreted as Stephen King's struggle with addiction. Stephen King is the original author of The Shining. And in the novel, Jack Torrance overcomes his trappings in the labyrinth and in the end redeems himself. In the movie, he succumbs to his demons and is forever trapped in the labyrinth of the Overlook Hotel. Now, alcoholism is a heavy subject, and I'm not saying Scooby-Doo tackles this deep subject matter like The Shining did. What I'm driving at here is that when we see an abandoned castle, on the surface, we might be fearing ghosts or a mad doctor who might be inside and trap us in there forever. Instead, I'd argue that maybe we fear the castle as subconsciously we realize we are often trapped ourselves by our own fears. So many people never live to their full potential as they are afraid they aren't good enough, not smart enough, not good looking enough, or not rich enough. We get trapped in our own minds with our own insecurities, and that truly makes the labyrinth scary to me. Subconsciously, we are forever cursed to wander the same hallways. We follow the same routines every day because we're afraid to open doors as we are terrified what may lay behind them. What makes Scooby-Doo so brilliant is that with every episode, we see this cowardly dog conquering that labyrinth again and again in every single episode. Every Scooby-Doo episode basically has the same beats. We get the inciting incident where the gang catch wind of a ghost, and then the gang enter the labyrinth, whether that be an abandoned movie set, a pirate ghost cave, an empty museum, or a haunted performance hall. From here, Scooby and Shaggy are chased and then convinced, often with the help of a Scooby snack or two, to go further into the labyrinth and conquer their fear. In the end, everything is hunky-dory, and Scooby lets out a victorious Scooby-Dooby-Doo as he has escaped the labyrinth a better dog for saving his friends and those in dire need. And this is what makes Scooby-Doo so inspiring. As kids, and of course adults, Scooby-Doo proves to us that we can conquer our fears, and while it might be a bumpy ride at times, sometimes that trap doesn't go perfectly, we'll always end up growing from that experience and walk away a better person. Anyway, that wraps up part 1 of my visual essay of the Gothic Horror of Scooby-Doo. Join me next time, which I'm hoping will be within a month or so, when I will be covering the concepts of forbidden knowledge and the anti-hero. Until then, stay spooky.